Hello, everybody. My name is Cipres. I am Director of Research at Zaragoza Logistics Centre. And today I wanted to introduce you the concept of communities of practice and how they are making a difference in the role in the future of logistics. The agenda for the session will be, first of all, to define what the communities of practice are, and then see the role of the communities of practice in LEAD project specifically, and how they are enablers for the co-creation approach of the project. So first of all, let's define what a community of practice is. Specifically for logistics, we will see it later on, but in general, a community of practice is really a group of people who share a concern or a passion, and they interact and learn by interacting regularly. So this is the approach that we are going to take into LEAD project, but this is something horizontal that can happen across businesses, education, government, or even civic life. So this is what is really interesting for the community of practice of LEAD project, that we can envision the variety of stakeholders involved. Before looking at the community of practice of LEAD, I wanted to show you the innovations that LEAD is bringing to the table. And apart from dealing with digital twins and its impact in last mile logistics for the first time, and also helping cities embrace technology, this project is really bringing the co-creation approach of solutions for on-demand economy. So this co-creation approach means creating together with different stakeholders the solutions that we are going to test in the frame of the project. And in order to do so, it's when it takes place the community of practice. So when creating LEAD community of practice, we really followed this community of practice methodology that I just mentioned, building this peer-to-peer learning context and providing a community of practice facilitator to orchestrate all of that. But what was key for LEAD communities of practice was to have all stakeholders involved that have a say in city logistics. So city councils, Cipres, retailers, transport association, riders, but also neighbor associations, because the impact of the solutions are going to also be relevant for the citizens themselves, right? So we wanted to have neighbor associations as well. So where this community of practice takes place in the Living Lab approach. So the Living Lab approach has three phases in LEAD project. And the first one, it is indeed the creation, the setting up of the community for the Living Lab. And this is where the community of practice is created. But also in this first phase, we define the problem and we define the KPIs that are going to be assessing the impact of the proposed solutions. The second phase of the Living Lab is then going to define the implementation plan for the Living Lab, and eventually the last phase is the actual implementation and testing on the Living Lab in real life, but also the digital twin. And both are running hand in hand, and you can see this is a loop because each one is feeding the other with data to make sure the digital twin is always mimicking what is happening in real life in the Living Lab. So let's look at this first phase of the Living Lab methodology, the community setup. This is where all the stakeholders were engaged. And as I mentioned, this is where not only city council, associations, companies were involved, but also neighbor associations to make sure we had all the viewpoints involved when defining the value case. And this is indeed the methodology we used for the problem definition, the value case methodology. That is a multi-stakeholder, multi-value approach. And it helped us define the scenarios that were going to be tested in each one of the Living Labs, but also define the KPIs that were going to measure the impact of the proposed solution. So the KPIs that were defined together with all the stakeholders for the Living Labs not only had to do with the economic value of the solutions, but also the environmental impact and the social impact. And together is what we consider the sustainability impact of the Living Labs. But also Living Labs had to make sure the business visibility of the proposed solutions. So this is also something that we are going to measure, and there are indicators for that. And other inputs to different areas. For instance, how the proposed solutions are going to impact the sustainable urban logistics plans of the cities, but also the transferability potential. How can we really learn from these outcomes of these living labs and apply it to other cities across Europe. So where this co-creation approach continues after the setting up of the community of practice? Well, it happens throughout the life of the project, because indeed the digital twin and the living lab have to be running in parallel, and we need to have the living lab community of practice always present to make sure that the data that is needed in the digital twin models can be gathered. So all the stakeholders in the community of practice are really assessing that the data that is going to be needed can be provided, but also the models that the technical developers are creating have to fit the need of the scenarios and of the problems. And that is where the Living Lab community of practice members can really have a say on the models that are needed to solve the scenarios. That was all from my side. Thank you so much.